My brother ruined my life, got my wife pregnant, now he wants my help after our parents disowned him and left me $2 million. Growing up, my little brother David always seemed to carry this intense grudge against me. But if you think it was because he was jealous, you'd be way off. He was the apple of everyone's eye, not me. Our mom totally spoiled him, she cooked his meals, did his laundry, and even roped me into helping him with his homework. I was just expected to help out because we're family, but I never got the same treatment. I guess I was pretty independent and just went along with it, maybe because I always took care of his needs without expecting anything back. He never helped me out when I needed it and only came to me when he wanted something. While I was the quiet, studious type, content with my own company, David was loud and boisterous, much like our dad. I tend to be direct and honest, no sugarcoating here, and I think my mom wasn't a fan of that aspect of me. David was the shining star of the family, and I was cool with that, until things got rough. Problems started popping up when David began to bully me just for being different. He'd tease me about my height and my glasses, and he even had the nerve to sneak into my room, read my diary, and tattletale to mom about it. When I yelled and complained about him snooping, my parents just brushed it off like it was no big deal. He did worse stuff, too, like almost breaking my glasses or messing with my food. Once, he even put tiny stones in my cereal, but luckily I spotted them before chomping down. Mom shrugged it off, saying that's just how brothers mess around. Whenever we got into fights, David was quick to hit me where it hurt. He knew I was getting bullied at school, and instead of having my back, he joined in, calling me names and egging the bullies on, suggesting I was just a big failure. During one silly argument, which I don't even remember the reason for, he told me to kill myself. Most of the time, I could shrug off his taunts, but that one really stung, especially since I was battling my own mental health issues at the time. I'm in a better place now, but hearing that from my own brother was soul-crushing. With dad always at work and mom not really tuning in, things just spiraled. She even blamed me once for riling him up. High school was a mess, too. David once tried to set my hair on fire, and unbelievably, mom played it off like he was just messing around. Who does that? Thankfully, dad finally sided with me and laid down the law, threatening David with the police. That was a wake-up call for him because he'd always gotten away with everything scot-free. Dad had had enough, demanding David show me some respect. Later, dad came to talk to me in my room. I didn't expect him to take my side, since he always told David how much they were alike, which was true. Dad admitted he hoped David would grow up and mature but was starting to see he was turning into a bully. Hearing that from dad was so validating, and I almost started crying. I told him everything David put me through, including the bullying at school. Dad was shocked at how much I had been through. The next day, he had a chat with the principal to make sure those bullies knew there'd be serious consequences if they kept it up. That evening, dad signed me up for MMA classes at the local gym, telling me it was time to stand up to the bullies in my life. Sure, the idea of a nerdy kid like me taking on fighting might have seemed funny, but I was all in. I balanced school and workouts, and those MMA classes changed my life, both in how I looked and felt. One day, David was being his usual self and stole my pocket money, the allowance we got for doing chores. I'd been saving up, and he snuck into my room to swipe it. I caught him just as he was about to ride off with his friends. I demanded my money back, but David just taunted me, saying all I could do was go crying to daddy. I don't know what snapped in me, but I punched him right in the face. He was totally shocked, fell back, and I grabbed my money from his pocket before shoving him back down. David started crying, which was kind of funny in a way. But then mom dashed out to see what was up and found out I'd fought him. She was totally shocked and scolded me, saying, I was thinking, I really need to step up my game as a brother to David. He seemed to get a real kick out of seeing me get in trouble. My mom was on my case, too, complaining to dad that I needed to be, kept in check or whatever. So, dad sat us down, all serious, and wanted to hear our sides of the story. I told him straight up, David swiped the money I'd been busting my butt to save. David, on the other hand, tried to spin it like he needed the cash for a date and thought I should help him out cause I'm his brother. But dad wasn't having it. He told David he's lucky I just gave him a punch for stealing. He made it clear that anyone else might have gone to the cops. David didn't take that well and threw a fit, probably hoping mom would back him up. But dad stood his ground. When it sank in for David that I wasn't going to get punished for the smackdown, he freaked out, shouted about how much he hated me, and locked himself in his room. After that whole mess, David started giving me the cold shoulder. It finally clicked for him that he couldn't push me around anymore, and even dad wasn't backing his nonsense anymore. For once, it felt like we were on equal footing. While he couldn't throw punches at me anymore, He turned to throwing verbal jabs whenever the parents weren't around. As the years went by, his attitude got worse, more angry and quick to snap. Whenever I'd ask him something, he'd just ignore me, mutter something like nerd or loser, and saunter off. If he had to tell me something, he'd go through mom instead of talking to me directly. I'd ask her why he couldn't just speak to me, but she'd just tell me to be patient and understanding. I couldn't figure out if it was just him going through puberty or if he genuinely disliked me. Dealing with his constant digs got exhausting, and I was itching to move out and away from him. I tried getting mom to help us sit down and talk things over, but she wasn't interested in playing mediator. Whenever I asked her why David acted this way, she brushed it off. Finally, I got into my dream university on a scholarship, top student and all. Dad threw a little party for me, and even mom seemed proud. But David? He couldn't care less, acted like it was any other day. Leaving for college was like a mix of excitement and sweet relief to get away from the toxic vibes at home. The first few months at uni were amazing. I made some great friends, loved my classes, and started living life without that constant worry of David's verbal attacks. It felt like a massive weight lifted off my shoulders. In my second year, I met Karen at this frat party, thanks to a mutual friend, and we just clicked. Coming from a religious background, having kids before marriage was kind of a no-go, but when we found out she was pregnant in our senior year, we decided to tie the knot right after graduation. Our wedding was small but super joyful, and our families were thrilled. At that moment, I was convinced Karen was the one for me. I always wanted the whole one woman to come home to kind of deal, and despite the attention from other women over the years, I stayed faithful because I was genuinely happy with Karen. But then, the truth hit me like a truck. I found out Karen had two affairs. One was this on and off thing with a married coworker that dragged on for years, and the other was a quick fling with an ex while visiting her folks. Maybe I was a bit naive, and looking back, I can't entirely disagree. Even when we took breaks, I chose to forgive her. I didn't want our kid to grow up in a broken home, and I genuinely believed we could get past this. The affair with her coworker happened when we were young, and I chalked it up to youthful stupidity. For a while, things seemed better, but even though I tried to let it go, the trust was never fully there again. I figured if I was going to forgive her, I had to go all in and start fresh. It's been 4 years since her second cheating episode, and I felt secure in giving her another shot. Karen seemed different, and we were happy envisioning our future together. But then, 3 months ago, it felt like my whole world fell apart again. She dropped a bombshell that she'd been in a long-term affair and our son might not even be mine. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks: shock, betrayal, you name it, I felt it. I was struggling to wrap my head around all this, and when I finally managed to ask why she hid such a huge secret, her response was just cold. It was like she was detached from the chaos she'd caused, and her vague answers left me completely shattered. So, there I was, totally confused and feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. My whole sense of trust in my family was crumbling. I kept asking Karen to come clean because, come on, I had the right to know who the real dad was of the kid I'd been raising as my own. Eventually, she spilled the beans. It was David. You can imagine my shock. I was like, wait, what? Karen explained that she became friends with my brother David after I introduced her to my family when she stayed with us over the holidays from Thanksgiving to New Year's. David, who was usually pretty distant with me, was all friendly and nice to her, which I thought was great because I didn't want her to feel left out. She really wanted to fit in with my family, so she spent loads of time with my mom and noticed the tension between me and David. We had a heart-to-heart, and I told her about my rocky relationship with him, saying it was probably beyond fixing because of some unresolved issues. She seemed to get it but started including David in our hangouts, hoping maybe we'd bond. Whenever we set up a movie night, she'd invite David, and we'd watch whatever he picked. During those times, David and I actually talked a bit, way better than his usual silent treatment. Karen and David even played video games together, which I didn't think much of. Then Karen told me how one day David opened up to her about a tough breakup he was going through. Feeling pretty down, he struck up a friendship with her. It started with some harmless flirting when I wasn't around, and then things got out of hand. Just picturing Karen and my brother together made me feel sick. She confessed she felt bad about what happened and broke it off with him, explaining why she left abruptly before New Year's despite me trying to convince her to stay. After the holidays, when we were back at college, she seemed her usual self, so I didn't suspect a thing. 2 weeks later, she found out she was pregnant and admitted she wasn't sure who the dad was, me or David. Without a way to know for sure, she decided to stay with me because I was the more reliable brother, which is how we ended up getting married. It felt like my world was crumbling. The son I adored might not even be mine. I asked Karen if she was still seeing David, and with a slow nod, she admitted they'd kept in touch because they just couldn't resist each other. Turns out, half of her business trips were actually romantic rendezvous with him. I wanted to know why she chose to marry me if she was into my brother, and she said she didn't want to be the one to call off the wedding. She saw me as a great dad to our son and decided to stick around. According to her, she made a mistake and couldn't figure out how to stop. I told her I appreciated the honesty but was packing up and leaving. She broke down, asking for forgiveness and expecting me to lose it, but I was just calmly packing my bags. She pleaded with me, saying if I loved her, I should fight for her because everyone messes up sometimes. When she saw I wasn't going to buy it, she switched gears, saying our son would be hurt by a divorce and that kids need to grow up with both parents. I had to remind her the kid might not even be mine, which made her cry even more and call me heartless. She seemed to think there was no way I'd actually walk away from our marriage. Maybe it was partly my fault for ignoring things in the past. I did love her, but mostly because I thought we had this life with our son. Karen kept saying it wasn't too late to fix things, but I just couldn't trust her anymore, no matter what she said. Even if I could forgive, I'd never forget she'd slept with my brother. I've always believed in forgiving mistakes because we're all human, but this was just too much. I left her crying as I walked out and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went to my parents' place and laid it all out, told them everything about how Karen and David had been secretly seeing each other for years. Their faces showed pure shock. My mom, being her usual self, tried to defend David at first, saying her son would never do something like that to his own brother. Determined to lay it all out, I asked them to keep quiet while I called David. I needed to catch him off guard, thinking it was just a one-on-one chat. When David answered, I confronted him, and he was all about denying it and dodging responsibility. But when I said Karen had already told me everything, he started throwing the blame around. So there I was, listening to David make a fool out of himself. My sister was calling him characterless, and he just brushed it off, saying it wasn't his fault if women found him irresistible and that he was the better-looking brother. I looked at him straight and told him I'd spill the beans to everyone. David just laughed in my face, acting all cocky, saying nobody would believe me because he was the golden child. I rolled my eyes at his ego and thanked him for proving me right, knowing full well our parents heard the whole thing. Suddenly, David went all quiet, trying to stammer out some excuse to save face. Mom was just standing there, shocked, and demanded David explain himself. David tried to wriggle out of it, blaming everyone but himself, even trying to shift the blame onto Karen. But I could tell my mom, who always stuck up for him, was now feeling a mix of anger and disappointment. I finally felt vindicated. After years of putting up with David's crap, the truth was out, and the tables had turned. David was the one who looked bad now, and his lies were all out in the open. David's words dried up, and my dad, usually the quiet type, couldn't hide how let down he was. He asked me to hand him the phone so he could talk to David. Dad started his speech, clearly sounding disappointed. David, your actions don't just betray your brother, they've let down this whole family. You slept with your brother's wife and kept the affair going even after they married. This isn't just a small slip-up, it's a big deal. You totally trashed the trust we had in you. I raised you both to value family and decency, and what you've done goes against everything I taught you. He paused, letting his words sink in. What you did to your brother in his marriage is beyond okay. You've hurt him and ripped apart our family's bond. Your mom and I blame ourselves a bit for how you turned out, but we're done with this behavior. From now on, you're cut off from the college fund. You'll have to sort out your university fees yourself. I'm also done bankrolling your lifestyle. You think sleeping with married women makes you a man? Let's see how you do without my money. I stayed calm through all this, even though I wanted to yell at David. Seeing Dad lay down the law was the ultimate payback. It was clear David hadn't thought this through. Even as David tried to keep justifying himself, Mom, despite being upset, kept trying to make excuses for him. But Dad was having none of it and ended the call, shutting down David's sob story. Later, Mom came up to me and hugged me. We hadn't shared a moment like that in a while, but it felt like we finally understood each other. She said sorry for not believing me all these years. My teenage self never imagined a moment like this, being rightfully vindicated and supported by my mom. After all that, Dad helped me find a good lawyer to get divorced from Karen. She and her lawyer tried playing dirty, asking for alimony since I earned more, but her affair worked in my favor. We even did a paternity test, and surprise, surprise, David was the kid's father. Hearing that hurt more than finding out about Karen's betrayal. I was crushed that the son I'd loved and raised wasn't actually mine. But I stayed strong. Karen begged me to keep visiting the kid, saying he shouldn't be punished for what happened, but I just couldn't do it. He reminded me too much of David, and I hated that. After the divorce was final, I felt this amazing sense of freedom moving into my own place. It felt weird living solo since I married so young and never got that independence. But being naturally independent, I quickly got used to my new life and loved every bit of it. 2 weeks ago, Dad called to say he planned to change his will, not wanting to leave anything to David. Once Dad decided to cut David off, he stuck to it. David tried to reach out to them, even showing up at their doorstep, begging for forgiveness, but they wouldn't let him in. Even Mom, who usually caved to David's tantrums, seemed done. David never texted me to say sorry for what he did, proving he didn't regret it. He was just mad about being cut off from the folks. Dad told me he intended to leave everything to me, so David couldn't contest it later. He'd leave David just $1. I was shocked. Dad had worked his whole life, and all his assets, retirement, and life insurance added up to nearly $2 million. The only condition in his will was that if Dad passed before I did. So, my mom decided she'd keep living in our family house even though it's technically mine now. I'm cool with it because I want to look after her in her twilight years. Anyway, somehow my brother David got wind of the whole ownership change, and since he couldn't reach our parents, he called me yesterday to try to patch things up. He poured out how he's been having a rough time with college and how Karen, after finding out about the baby's paternity, has been hounding him for child support. Poor guy says he's broke and can't even find a part-time gig. He pretty much begged me to help him reset things with the family, but I wasn't having it. I couldn't help but laugh at him. I reminded him he should have thought twice before getting involved with my wife and getting her pregnant. David tried to argue I was being harsh, saying Karen was just as much to blame. I couldn't disagree there, but I reminded him that I divorced her, and she's his problem now, not mine. His drama with her and the kid is the fallout of his own choices. He started raising his voice, but I cut him off, making sure he knew he was no longer the golden boy of the family but the one who crossed the line by getting with his brother's wife. That's when David broke down crying, saying everyone, even our grandparents and other relatives, had turned their backs on him. While it was true, it wasn't my thing to worry about anymore. I told him we were done and made it clear that he shouldn't call me again. I can't see him as my brother anymore after all this. I've replayed that chat over and over in my head. Even though I can't stand him right now, hearing him cry really got to me. It's been ages since I've seen him like that. It leaves me wondering if I should talk to our parents about him or just let it be. And just so you know, a lot of folks have been asking why I don't talk to my son Henry anymore, and some even called me heartless. I need to lay it all out there, I just can't handle raising another man's child. This isn't like a stepdad situation. I was made to believe Henry was my son, and finding out he's actually David's son cut deep. I cried about it for days. The main reason I'm keeping my distance from Henry is that I don't want Karen, who I've separated from, in my life. Having a kid in common with her would keep the door open for her to come back into my life, and I need my space. Some might think I'm being harsh, but I don't see myself seeing Henry anytime soon, maybe not for a long time. Updates on this drama: a lot of you guessed right, it was my mom who spilled the beans to David about my dad changing his will, which prompted David to reach out to me, hoping to fix things. I confronted her in front of my dad, and she broke down, saying that David had paid enough for his mistakes and had learned his lesson. My dad, being the rock that he is, told her that if she could forgive David's betrayal, then he couldn't stay married to her. That shut things down real quick. My dad made it crystal clear that if she ever contacted David again and we found out, she'd have to pack her bags and leave. Dad's pretty set in his ways, so hopefully, my mom will think twice next time. Last update: it's been 5 months since my last post, and things with my parents have been getting better. My dad and I have hit it off, we're basically golf buddies now. Although my mom misses David, she's kept her distance. I heard through the grapevine, specifically, my cousin, that David's been asking everyone for money and dropped out of college because he couldn't afford it anymore. He and Karen are living together now, and he's got a part-time gig as a mechanic. They're raising Henry together, which is probably for the best, all things considered. We don't talk about David at home, and I'm doing pretty well myself. I recently got a promotion, so my paycheck's looking nicer. I'm still not dating anyone, though. I need some time to process everything. Therapy's been helping, so let's see how it goes. Thanks for sticking with me. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications to catch more jaw-dropping stories going on around you.